so quiet. Hi.
Hey.
Oh. Socks is like coming right in there.
Kitty
I
wants
know.
to drink.
Hey. Oh.
Maybe not the equipment.
Oh, hey,
Like,
everybody.
are you guys done with this podcast already? It's 5 seconds. Hey, welcome to another week of Case Files.
With Kat.
And Ashley.
No.
And Socks.
And Socks, who's going to knock this thing over and we're going to, the whole thing. Hey, so
Hey.
how you doing?
Well, probably great because I'll be out of town when this plays. So
Whatever.
behind the
We're
scenes
pre-recording.
is
We're pre-recording. You
I
didn't
think
have to
people
tell
are gonna
people
think.
that.
Well, I mean, when they're like, "I'm out of town," I'm like, "How is she?"
I don't know how long you're going.
Well, I'm sure I'll post about it.
Okay.
I'm great.
And she's going to be at, what's your address that you're going to be at? And
I'll be far away from Texas, thank God. Love you guys. Bye.
love y'all,
Anyways,
but love
yeah.
y'all, but no. Yeah. You're going to have a great time. Okay. So, we are recording right before you leave
Yes.
so that we can have an episode when you're gone.
I think there will be 1 week while I'm gone that we don't have one. I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't do that. I know.
All right. So everybody will have a week off. We'll have a week off after this episode, but we will be back. So hang tight.
I think it will actually.
I might have to have Sarah over here.
Yeah, I think
People have asked her. Someone asked her today, in fact.
Oh my God! As if we're not the host of the show.
And she just laughs and goes, "No, but I've been on her show a lot." She's so funny. I love it. I love her.
Hilarious.
So much. Okay.
Yeah, the week would be Valentine's Day week. But
Oh,
I wouldn't be
yeah, no.
here
Yeah, no.
unless we record like on
Valentine's
live air.
Day? No, yeah. All right. Okay, so what story do you have? We're pre-recording. So
Well, I was just gonna say, in case you don't listen to the other episode,
everybody does, so don't,
this is
You
really
just
good
want
beer,
to promote. You just want to
This
promote
beer
it.
is really good.
She's still.
Anyways, it's the Fist Bumps by TP Beer. It's really good. It's a sour beer. It's great. Anyways, my story's a disappearance. Okay.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's like
okay.
a disappearance, unsolved mystery, all rolled into one package.
It's
Technically not a murder because there was never a body, so I don't know if they were murdered. But
nobody, no crime.
yeah, sure.
Okay, sure. All right.
It's not nearly as depressing as the last episode.
I think, and I think the T. Colin Davis was the most frustratingly unfair.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Just that.
We've had some very frustrating. Someone came up to me at the chamber luncheon that listens to our show and said, "You were sighing so much during that episode," and I was like, "Yeah,
during
I can't."
Yours or during
yours.
mine? Oh my God.
Where you were talking and I kept sighing because it was stressing me out. Like, you sighed so much during that episode. I was like, I fucking know. It stressed me out. So yeah. Anyways.
I didn't even hear you. Honestly, I didn't even hear you. I think I must have been sighing too, or
you were very passionate about what you were talking about.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, it's whenever you do, if you do it, or if I, do that you know so much about a story that you could just almost tell it without even writing it down. And I read everything, listened to everything. And so I'm just oh, there's so much to say. And I'm only doing this in a 2-hour time frame. Basically, I really should have done it into 3 because there was so much more.
That's what I feel about this story that I'm gonna do. I feel like it could literally have been 3 or 4 episodes because they're when we get into all of the suspects and all that stuff, theirs were pages and pages and pages.
So some stories
suspects.
are just like that.
I cut out a lot of those and just talked about the main ones, but oh my God, there's just this story, I'm sure most people, I'm just going to go ahead and start.
Yeah.
Most people probably have heard about this case. You're probably familiar with this case, but you don't know all of the details, all of the suspects, like what's going on now. It's the Springfield Three. Oh,
He's already covering his eyes. He doesn't even want to. He's like,
look at his proper little leg, cross his back leg.
no, but he's like this. He's got his little paws over each of the eyes. Like, no.
Everyone needs to get themselves a support kitty. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the Springfield Three. So that would be Suzanne Streeter, Stacy McCall, and Suzanne's mother, Sherrill Levitt. So
hold on.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What are you?
We didn't talk about your sign.
Oh my gosh. Okay, guys. So the wizard is obsessed with board games.
Obsessed.
And I found this metal sign one day. I don't even remember what it was. I think it was like one of those bin stores. Anyways, it says, you can't buy happiness, but you can buy board games. And that's kind of the same thing. Anyways, they set up our studio area with board games. And I complained my sign wasn't in here. And now it's in here. So thank you. So precious.
So precious.
Okay. Well.
He was like, oh, I got called out and then fixed it.
I was just kidding.
No, you weren't.
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
Anyways, okay, I'm doing the Springfield Three. Suzanne Streeter, Stacy McCall, and Suzanne's mother, Sherrill Levitt. Now, again, this was a pretty well talked about case at the time. There was billboards, there were shows, there's, because of how weird it is. Like, the disappearance itself is just bizarre. So Sherrill, which was Suzanne's mother, was born Sherrill Elizabeth Williams on November 1st, 1944, and spent most of her youth in the area surrounding Seattle, Washington. She met her first husband here. His name was Brent Streeter. They had 2 children, their son Bart, and then in 1973 they had Suzanne. Suzanne was born on March 9th, 1973, and was born with a small cosmetic birth defect on her chin. I'm sorry, the cat's having a photo shoot right now. Anyways, Sherrill's marriage with Brent had already been circling the drain for a while before Suzanne's birth, but afterwards Brent would apparently just float the idea of them getting the divorce, and they continued to live together so that Sherrill could collect welfare and afford medical care for Suzanne. Sherrill immediately divorced Brent and kicked him out of the home, working hard to put a roof over her and her children's heads. So she had these 2 kids. She was on her own. And in 1980, Sherrill relocated with her kids to Springfield, Missouri. So both of the stories kind of involve Missouri because Becky from the last story was a traveling nurse. She worked often in Missouri.
Is it M.O.?
No, it's Missouri. It's Missouri. I actually typed out Missouri for this story.
Yeah, good.
Anyway, so in 1980, Sherrill relocated with her 2 kids out to Springfield, Missouri, where she struggled for just a brief time. She worked random jobs in order to pay her rent and eventually began a career as a cosmetologist and beautician. She remarried in the 80s to a man named Don Levitt, from whom she would take on the surname Levitt. Now, Don Levitt already had a daughter named Belinda, who was the same age as Sherrill's son, Bart, and the family they lived together very peacefully for a number of years. In 1989, however, Sherrill and Don did divorce. Based on numerous reports, it seemed like it was due to financial strain of a failed business by Don. And it was the cause of their split, but they were still very friendly. They were on really good terms. It wasn't a nasty divorce. Neither was the first one, really. Neither one of her divorces were contentious. So afterwards, Sherrill gave up on dating in general and chose not to see anyone in the years that followed. A friend would later claim that Sherrill was quite a hermit. She just stayed to herself. In 1992, as 47 at the time, Sherrill was working as a cosmetologist at New Attitudes Hair Salon in Springfield, where she had about 250 clients. That year, she purchased a home along the 1700 block of East Delmer Street in Springfield and moved in with her daughter, Suzanne. Sherrill would spend most of her free time that spring either renovating or decorating the home, not only on the inside, but the outside. Already known for keeping a tidy and clean home, Sherrill loved spending her time making very small improvements here and there. She really, really enjoyed like these little projects. It gave her something to do. Suzanne Elizabeth Streeter, better known as Susie, was born in March of 1973, as I stated. She spent her first 6 years in Seattle, and then her and her mother and brother, of course, all moved in the 80s to Springfield. And she never really knew her father, so Susie grew up to be incredibly close with her mother, Sherrill. And for most of Susie's life, they were inseparable to the point where, unlike most kids her age, Susie would often cancel plans with her friends so that she could spend time with her mom. She had no real relationship with her father at all and wouldn't have much of a relationship with her stepfather, Don, after he and Susie's mom divorced in 1989. Susie's friends say that she never really talked about the divorces at all, and and they didn't really say that didn't mean they didn't affect her, but just she didn't really seem to care to talk about it. Like, it wasn't to her a big part of her life because she was so close to her mom, and that's all that really mattered to her was that relationship. So in Springfield, Susie would attend Kickapoo High School and seemed to struggle with Kickapoo. If you went there and I'm saying that wrong, I'm sorry.
That's a fun thing to say.
Yeah,
Kickapoo.
that's how I'm going to say it.
Yeah,
so that's how it looks. That's how it's spelled. She seemed to struggle with a certain aspect of her studies, in particular reading. Those that knew her would say that she was dyslexic. Dyslexic. Oh my God. Dyslexic. Oh my God. I've said this word a million times.
Gosh.
Oh my gosh, guys, just fire me. Anyways, she had trouble shaping letters into cohesive words. Beyond that, she also seemed to have trouble adapting to the natural kind of order of high school, which can often be very overwhelming and intimidating to even the most, well-adjusted teenagers, right? So a family friend named Janet that lived with Sherrill and Suzanne for a brief time stated that Susie was a very sensitive girl. She felt like she wasn't part of the in crowd and she didn't have enough friends. Having fallen in with a tough crowd for a bit in high school, Susie seemed to have really gotten her head on straight during that final year, as graduation was approaching. And in addition to attending school, she worked at a movie theater and had her sights set on following her mother into the cosmetology field. In her free time, she would go bowling, she would watch movies, and she spent most of her time with her longtime friend named Stacy McCall. So Stacy was the youngest of 3 daughters, and her parents were Stuart and Janice, and she was born April 23rd, 1974. Described by her mother as a daddy's girl, so kind of opposite of Suzanne, who was very attached to her mother. Stacy was very close to her father. She was described as a girly girl that often took a while to get jokes that her family loved to throw around. So she earned the nickname Stacy, but she embraced it. She loved it.
Okay.
Like, she wouldn't get jokes. Like, people would tell her jokes and it would take her a while. I don't know. I'm just giving you fun facts about these people. Anyways.
Like that thing she's... Okay.
I don't know, man.
All right.
These were direct quotes from her mother, okay? They called her Spacey Stacy.
Wow. Okay.
Always close with her family, Stacy had become close with Suzanne when the pair were in 2nd grade. Since then, they had been through various stages of being involved in each other's lives. They had always been friends, and months before high school graduation in 1992, they became even closer because while attending the same high school, Stacy worked as the secretary receptionist for the Springfield Gymnastics and was preparing to attend Southwest Missouri State University in the later half of 1992. She had often suffered from debilitating migraines and, Stacy had often suffered from debilitating migraines, which required medication. And Stacy often refused to let her migraines, kind of distract her from what she wanted to do. And she really wanted to focus because her and Suzanne just kind of had this plan that they were going to be friends for life. They were going to go, they were graduating together. Oh. They were going to like they were each other's best friends.
I know.
Oh my gosh. We can pretend they're still alive.
Okay.
On June 7th, 1992, Suzanne, Stacy, and Sherrill went missing from Sherrill's home and have not been seen or heard from since. All of their personal belongings, including cars and purses, were left behind. There were no signs of a struggle. There was a message on the answering machine that we'll talk a little bit more later that police think might have provided a clue, but it was inadvertently erased.
No.
So the day before the disappearance, both Suzanne and Stacy had graduated from high school on June 6th. Sherrill was in attendance and Stacy's parents were there. They were all driving their own cars. Susie and Stacy, again, each driving their own vehicles. So Suzanne had originally gone home to have dinner with her mother, like they had gone and eaten. And then Susie and Stacy had plans to meet back up. And so they did. They met back up at their friend Janelle Kirby's home in Battlefield, Missouri, which was about 10 miles southwest of where they lived in Springfield. So they had these plans to go to all of these graduation parties.
Right.
And, you graduate, you're just excited. Anyways, there were several that they were going to. And Janelle Kirby was a friend that both Susie and Stacy had known since early childhood. Stacy had been friends with Janelle since preschool.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And Susie had known her since second grade.
I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody that long. I don't have anybody in my life that I've known that long.
Yeah. I don't think I have. I have very few friends from high school even, or I don't have any friends from college.
Like I know people from junior high. I have friends from high school, but nobody younger than that. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy that they know each other since preschool. My kids have friends that they've known, and I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah, I've never been a people person. I know that's so shocking.
But it's not even, I don't know. Yeah. Is it that? I don't know. We've moved a lot.
I've moved a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, so while
Sorry, I threw you off.
No. While I accidentally moved my mouse. While the three had gone through their ups and downs over the years, they had different friend groups. They had always ended up back with one another. They did have one other friend named Adina Ruth. I don't know how to say her name. It's Ruthrauff. I've never seen a name like that before. Ruth. That's kind of how it's very difficult. They have been very close friends since high school, so she kind of came in later. They were all excited to celebrate because they were all graduating. So Janelle had a lot of family members in town, and her mother had offered to let the girls all kind of crash there that night if they felt like it after their party. Like they could all come back and sleep there. Susie and Stacy both arrived at Janelle's home at around 8, and a short time later, all the girls walked from Janelle's home to another graduation party nearby, leaving their cars at Janelle's home. Over the next few hours, they would be seen at a couple of different parties, including the one of the home Michelle Elder, which was a friend of Stacy's that she had fallen out of touch with just recently. That night, Stacy and Michelle had talked about rekindling their friendship. They made plans to get together the following evening. Like they really wanted to rebuild that relationship. So anyways, this, at some point the girls, changed their plans for that night. They decided that they were supposed to go to this other party but it was gonna be like a 45-minute drive, and they didn't really want to make that after, being out to all these places. And so instead they decided they were going to stay out late in Springfield with their friends. And they were going to go back to Janelle's home. And then they were all going to go to a water park. And so anyways, Stacy had called her parents to let them know about the change in plans, telling them that she planned to stay at Janelle's home that night. And at around 1:45 a.m. on June 7th, the party at Michelle Elder's was broken up by the police. So when that party got broken up by the police, it was mostly because of noise and whatever. The girls went back to Janelle's as planned to go to sleep. So they had shifted their plans to stay there, but when they got there, Susie and Stacy felt like they were imposing because Janelle had so many family members from out of town for her graduation. And so they felt like if they also stayed the night there, it was going to be kind of too much. And so they decided that they would just go back to Susie's home. It wasn't too far away. She just got this new water bed, so she was super excited. She wanted to show it off to at least one person.
Oh,
yeah.
Water beds.
Yeah, I know. So she was like, you know what? Let's just go back. And both Suzanne and Stacy had planned to meet Janelle and their other friends to go. So the original plan was to go to Branson, which is 45 miles away, or 45 minutes away. They were going to go there. They were going to stay. They were going to go to this water park. The plan changed. They didn't want to drive that night, so they were just going to go to this water park the next day. They were all going to meet back at Janelle's house and drive up to this water park together. Janelle's mother, Kathy, told the police she had overheard the pair leaving while she was in bed. She told them she heard Suzanne say to Stacy, "Follow me to my house," and Stacy responded, "Okay, I will." They were seen getting into their cars at 2:15 a.m. at Janelle's house, and this is the last time they were seen alive. It is assumed that they, in fact, did arrive back at the home, like at Suzanne's home, because their clothing, jewelry, purses, and vehicles were all there the next day. Sherrill was last heard from at around 11:15 that night when she spoke with a friend on the phone about painting and like she was talking to her friend about some of the projects she was doing around the home. The following morning, Sunday, June 7th, Janelle Kirby and her boyfriend, Mike Henson, waited for Suzanne and Stacy to arrive at her home because, they had all made those plans to meet at her house and drive to Branson and spend the day at the park. Janelle started calling Susie at around 7:30 in the morning and would just keep trying to call her over a couple of hours, yet there was no response. And it was as if the girls had, they felt like maybe they already left, like maybe they decided to just meet them there, but they thought it was kind of weird they hadn't called them. And so when they
but the two original girls and the mother now.
So yeah, okay.
So
Janelle and her boyfriend were at Janelle's home. Suzanne, Stacy, and Sherrill were at Sherrill's and Suzanne's home.
Okay.
The plan was, since they didn't drive up the night before to Branson, that Susie and Stacy would meet Janelle and her boyfriend at her home at 7:30 in the morning to collectively drive to the water park and spend the day there.
Okay.
Suzanne and Stacy never showed, and cell phones weren't like
right
a
that
thing.
Was the thing.
And so they kept trying to call their home, but no one was answering. And so she thought, well, maybe they drove up there without us. Maybe the plans changed. Maybe I misunderstood. So when they still got no response, and it had been hours since, they showed up, they began to worry that they had been left behind. So Janelle would reach out to other friends to see if they'd heard from either Stacy or Susie, and none of them had heard from them. There was a quote that was in the Springfield newspaper later on that said, Janelle stated, "I started getting worried because Stacy, she's so responsible, and so is Susie. I know that realistically they wouldn't have just taken off without telling us that they weren't going to Whitewater or that they weren't going to meet us." So after a while, Janelle and her boyfriend decided to go to Susie's home to check on them. And they arrived at the home at around noon that Sunday, and they were surprised to find all of the cars there. So Suzanne's, Stacy's, and Sherrill's cars.
How long did they wait?
They waited until noon. So they were supposed to meet at 8
in the morning.
Yeah, they were supposed to meet between 7:30 and 8 in the morning. They went to the house at noon after not hearing from them after trying to call around. So all three cars were parked in there. Sherrill's blue Corsica was parked in the carport on the side of the home per usual. Susie's red Ford Escort was parked in the curved driveway, and Stacy's Toyota Corolla was parked right behind her. Susie and Stacy's vehicles were not pulled all the way forward, however, something that later planted a seed of doubt in the minds of investigators and friends, because they said one of the co-workers of Suzanne was Nigel Kinney, and he was a very close friend of Suzanne, stated that she was a creature of habit and very particular about parking her vehicle in the same spot in the driveway every day. So he believes the fact that her car was not in the carport where she always is like OCD basically about parking it there meant that someone else possibly either parked in her spot when they arrived home or someone moved her car. Because that's
interesting.
She was very particular about
that's
parking
interesting. I'm like wondering, like, what do I do that's so particular that if somebody would be like, oh no, Kat would never do that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's interesting. Like, you're so neurotic about your parking space that people realize.
He was a good friend of hers. Yeah. So
Yeah.
And so he was like, no, that's definitely something. Like when the police said that about the cars being there, he was like, no, that's definitely something's wrong there. And so Janelle Kirby and her boyfriend Mike Henson actually go up to the door. They knock on it. They find the door unlocked. They go in the home because there's no answer, but all the cards are there. So they're worried that something has happened, right? And so they go in the home and they find Sherrill and Suzanne's dog, which was a Yorkie named Cinnamon. She was very agitated while in the home, the house phone started ringing. And so she answered it in hopes that it was, an answer to where any of them might have been, Sherrill, Stacy, or Suzanne. Janelle was surprised to hear a strange and disturbing voice on the other end. She claimed this person began making several sexual innuendos. She hung up immediately, but received another call right away that was similar to the first one and described the caller sounding teenish. Now,
like a teen, somebody who is a teen. Okay.
Yeah. Now, Janelle remembered Susie complaining about similar prank calls that she and her mother had been receiving since they moved into the home just a couple of months prior. So she didn't really think anything of it at the time. She's like, oh, this is just that person calling. I just happened to be here. So the phone calls, according to David Asher with the police department, the calls were obscene. The individual would not identify himself. They were using the F word a lot and just several other just very obscene words. And so just like Suzanne, Janelle just hung up the phone. Like she was just trying to find her friends. So they walk around the home and there's no signs of Suzanne, Stacy, or Sherrill. And so the pair decide that they're, maybe they went somewhere with the mother. They ran, what I mean? Like maybe the mother decided to take the girls somewhere to celebrate graduation or whatever. I don't know. And so the couple, they're teens. They want to go do stuff. So they decided they were just going to go to a local water park because now they didn't feel like driving to Branson because it was so late in the day. And thought that maybe they would just hear from their friends later. So throughout June 7th, now this is the next day, Janice is trying to locate her 18-year-old daughter, Stacy, because, Stacy had called her and told her that she was staying the night at Janelle's. So Janice learned early that Sunday that Stacy had not spent the night at Janelle's as she had previously claimed. However, after calling Janelle's home and speaking with her family, she discovered that Stacy had gone to stay the night at her other friend, Susie's home. Throughout the day, Janice would leave several voicemails at the home of Sherrill and Suzanne. Because, for y'all that are super young, we used to have answering machines. And you would have to call a landline and leave a message on an answering machine that was on a little tape that you had to play. Okay. So this is what was happening. She was calling the home and leaving messages on the answering machine. And she was growing more upset with each phone call, not being answered. Yet she didn't really have any reason to not be completely concerned yet. Because, she was a teenage girl. She just graduated. You're trying to convince yourself, right? Like nothing's wrong. You're just being kind of paranoid. Yeah. She knew that Stacy and Susie had been planning to drive out to the water park. And while she was upset that Stacy had not informed her of the change of plans, she knew that this was something that she was going to have to get used to with Stacy now being a graduate of high school. Oh. She thought maybe they just went to this water park and just hadn't, she just hadn't thought about calling home. However, later that day, word would get around that Janelle and some others had been trying to locate Stacy and Susie, and had dropped by Sherrill's home in an attempt to find them. When she learned that Stacy and Susie's cars had been parked in front of the home all day, Janice began to grow very alarmed. Hours after Janelle and her boyfriend had dropped by the home, Janice herself would arrive at the home with her other 2 daughters in tow. At around 7 p.m., Janice and her daughters pulled up to the home, and just like Janelle hours earlier, were surprised to find the front door unlocked. She too stepped inside and later recounted the family dog Cinnamon came barreling towards her, still in a state of agitation and upset. I mean, her owners were gone, right? Looking around the home, Janice was unable to find any sign of her missing daughter, Stacy, or Susie, or Susie's mother. And she did find something that she felt was even stranger. The purses of all 3 women were on Susie's bedroom floor near the bottom of a set of stairs. They were stacked next to each other and seemed to have been untouched. Nothing inside the purses seemed to be missing, including an $800 cash deposit that Sherrill had received from work the day prior. Wow. Their keys, jewelry, ID cards, money, cigarettes, everything was still there. Nothing was missing. Inside the bedroom, Janice also discovered her daughter's clothes from the night before neatly folded in a small stack along with Stacy's swimsuit, as if they had been preparing for the next morning. You know, they were going to change into their clothes, into the bathing suits, and go. As far as she knew, those were the only clothes that Stacy had, so she wouldn't have fit in any of Susie's. So her clothes being left behind made her more concerned than she had been previously. But later it was like, oh, she changed into her bathing suit. You know what I mean? And had folded her clothes. Anyways, the light inside Susie's room was off and the blinds were closed, but the TV was on, playing Snow by the time Janice and the others arrived. The bed looked slept in, almost appeared as if Susie and Stacy had fallen asleep watching a movie and forgot to turn it off afterwards. Not too far away from the missing purses were Sherrill and Susie's cigarettes, which was very unlike them. Sherrill in particular was an avid chain smoker, and Susie had developed a very similar habit, so leaving behind their cigarettes more than anything was enough to make it seem like something awful had happened to them. An unfinished can of Coke sat beside the cigarettes, seemingly abandoned just partway through. Feeling that things had become too unusual to ignore, Janice walked out into the living room and dialed the non-emergency line for the police department, reporting her daughter and the other 2 women were missing that evening. Now, after playing the call, she decided to check the answering machine, hoping that in doing so, she may hear a message left by one of the missing women. What she heard, however, was one of the most intriguing elements of the story. It was a strange message, and the details kind of remain cloudy, and police would express interest in this voicemail, believing that it contained a clue. However, she was the one that inadvertently erased the message. Unfortunately, back in the day, that was just something that sometimes messages after you play would automatically delete or accidentally delete. And so police and investigators never got to hear that message that was on the answering machine. Springfield police were notified on the strange disappearance of Sherrill Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall at around 9 p.m. on Sunday, June 7th, 1992, nearly an entire day after anyone had seen or heard from them. In the time that had passed, Sherrill had been visited by worried family members and friends, not just limited to Janice and Janelle. Others had dropped by, checking in on the missing women, and by the time the police arrived at the home, they estimated that anywhere between 10 to 20 people have been inside where they described as the crime scene, and it potentially destroyed any evidence that could have been there.
Oh my gosh.
It contaminated everything. And when Janelle and Mike had originally arrived, the cover that was on the porch light was on the porch shattered, not the light bulb, but the cover. And Mike had swept it up because Janelle was barefoot. And so he threw it away. And police said that was so damning because that could have been. But really, to me, it's like, what?
You don't know.
I don't know that would have just solved this entire case. I feel like that's a lot to put on a kid, right? Like he was just trying to do something for his girlfriend. They didn't know the people were missing. They didn't know it was a crime scene. He was trying to protect his girlfriend.
They're like, hey, there's a mess. We should clean this up.
They were trying to be helpful. Like, I feel like that's a lot to put on someone saying you caused this case to not be solved. Anyways, So,
Oh man.
yeah. One of the other elements on the scene that just looked kind of out of place was an awkwardly bent window blind in Sherrill Levitt's bedroom, which was left 1/4 of the way up, making it look as if someone had been peering outside. Her bed looked slept in, so the blind being slightly askew indicated that something unusual had happened while she slept, or perhaps right after waking up. But what that was, investigators had no idea. You know, like you're peeking out your window, the blinds kind of, get stuck or whatever. That's what it looked like had happened.
Yeah. Or if you try to turn it.
Yeah. So Cheryl's bedroom, which was normally kept very neat and very tidy, like she was obsessed with cleaning, was left in what they considered to be a mess by the time the authorities arrived at the scene. This was described as being very unusual by her former stepdaughter, Melinda, telling reporters, this is directly quoting Melinda, "That's not my mom. Oh my gosh. I mean, a pair of sandals, if she had been working in the yard, maybe would have been on the back step for half a day. She definitely would have hung up those clothes." So family members and friends would tell police after other strange deviations.
I wish I had that ability.
I don't. People would walk in my house and be like,
there's a pile that's like 2 feet thick
when
of
my
clothes I need to
house
hang.
flooded, right? My house flooded. The people were like, "Is it always like that?" I'm like, "It's always like this. This has nothing to do with the flood. My shit's just everywhere." I just don't have that cleaning gene. I don't live in trash before anyone thinks that. I'm just like, I don't care about organizing stuff. It'll take me forever to hang up clothes. Like, if I ever came missing, it wouldn't be the factor that people thought was like, "Oh, she's missing because there's shit everywhere." If the house was clean, be suspicious. That's when you should be suspicious. If the dishes are done and the laundry's done, it wasn't me. Anyways,
we love it when people come over to visit. Yeah, I mean, the wizard has just now stopped cleaning the house before you come over, and it's been 6 years. But whenever people come to visit, we're like, "Oh yeah," that gets us in the that's when our ADHD kicks in, and we're just like, "We got to clean." I
just don't have people over because I don't want to clean.
And we're always like, I love it when we have people over because the house gets super clean. I mean, it's never super messy, but
I did recently organize everything because it was getting on my nerves, and now I'm just like, I don't ever want to do that again. So if I ever go missing, the house is clean.
Okay.
Family members and friends would tell police the other strange deviations at the crime scene, including what Nigel had said earlier, that he described, that Susie was a creature of habit and the car was not parked where it should have been. There were the discrepancies involving the cigarettes. Sherrill and Susie had both smoked constantly. They were chain smokers. That was well known. So their cigarettes remaining at the scene was very striking to everyone that knew them, more so than the fact that their purses were there. Like, they were more shocked that the cigarettes were there than the purses. So even if they had been planning on just stepping out for less than an hour to grab food or just going outside, they would have taken their cigarettes and lighters with them. And so Officer Rick Bookout, the first police officer to arrive at the scene, later remarked, she'd leave her house without a lot of things, but a smoker wouldn't leave without her cigarette and lighter. And I'm thinking, this probably is not a good situation. So everyone, I don't mean to make light of the situation, but it's so bizarre that everyone just knows that something happened simply because they left their cigarettes. I don't know. I've never been a smoker like that. So I can't imagine.
They left. Oh no, they left their cigarettes. There's a shirt not hung up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess it'd be kind of like if they came to my house and they saw the beer, they'd be like, "Oh shit, she hasn't been here." So the beer being here, that would be, yeah. But the thing that was most odd to the police officers at the scene is that none of the women's belongings were missing. The purses, the keys, all of that stuff I mentioned earlier, and the fact that the dog was left behind. They thought maybe if they ran away, they weren't going to leave the dog. They would have taken the dog. So they clearly didn't make some weird pact with each other to leave.
That's how we know. Yeah. You would have left your animals. You'd never have left I would never leave my cats. Yeah. That's how you would know.
Oh, fuck the children. I would never leave my cats.
I mean, if it was just me, I'm just saying.
Oh, okay. Even Stacy's migraine medication was there. Medication she needed daily to keep herself from being in debilitating pain. Debilitating pain.
There it is.
Yeah. So the only thing that was missing was quite literally these 3 women. Police were unable to find any sign of forced entry on any of the doors or windows. The beds appeared to have been slept in. So whatever had happened in the morning of June 7th seems like Susie and Stacy had made it back home and that they had slept in Susie's bed. There were makeup wipes left behind indicating that both Susie and Stacy had, taken off their makeup. They had settled into bed, and whatever happened to them had likely happened by 8 a.m. So they left Janelle's at 2:15 a.m. They lived not very far, so like 2:30 at max, they would have been at the home. And then by 8 a.m., they were all gone. And so, surprisingly, a canvass of the area was unable to come up with anything definite. None of the neighbors had heard anything. They hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. They hadn't heard any screams. There was no shouting, no sounds of violence, nothing. A newspaper carrier that had come by during the vital, unexplained time frame of 2:30 to 7 saw and heard nothing. So the Sergeant Mark Webb of the Springfield Police Department would later state, "It's the strangest thing I've ever seen in my years with this department." Captain Tony Glenn would tell the Springfield News Leader years later, "The only thing unusual about this house was that the 3 women were missing from it. You had this feeling, you looked around, that something was missing, that something had to be missing.
Something had to be.
But there wasn't, except for them, just them." So in the days to come, family members and friends remained hopeful that the missing trio would turn up, and that just didn't happen. Oh. Sherrill had a doctor's appointment scheduled for Monday, June 8th. Stacy was scheduled to work that day as well. Suzanne was scheduled to work on Tuesday, June 9th, and none of these women showed up for any of these dates. Investigators struggled to determine a potential motive for the disappearance of the 3 women, but struggled to come up with anything that sounded feasible. None of them had any known enemies. None of them were, in this pre-existing reason to, anyone want to cause them harm. Basically, they weren't in relationships. They hadn't pissed anyone off. They had been graduating the night before. Sherrill was a hermit, and technically Susie and Stacy were not even supposed to be at the home, so it couldn't have been like a planned thing unless it was just to take Sherrill and then someone showed up and the 2 girls were there. So they didn't think it was a pre-planned thing, right? Because the girls weren't even supposed to be there. So they just could not figure out who would do this and why. So because they were all women, the notion that this crime may have been spontaneous or driven by some sexual motive did not elude the investigators. But again, in the absence of evidence or even a struggle, the possibilities were just so limited because there was no break-in, there was no forced entry. There was nothing out of or other than Sherrill's clothes being in a mess on the floor. There was nothing missing, nothing out of the ordinary.
And the blinds.
The dog was there. Their cars were there. Their money was there. So they just had no idea. So
there's got to be suspects, though, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about it. There were so many. So
where do they even start? I mean, I guess everybody's a suspect if there's nothing there's no like really good evidence leading them.
They said there was no one that had a grudge. They couldn't think of anyone that had a grudge against them or who had threatened them before. But there were a few, and we'll talk about a couple of those. It'll be a little bit later, but I'll just note now that Sherrill's son Bart would claim that none of them had spoken to his father in decades and that his stepfather had been essentially off the grid for years. So neither of the ex-husbands were ever a suspect because the investigators did track down these husbands, and one was living in a whole nother state with another family, like very happy. And the other one had a very solid alibi. The divorces had ended very friendly. They were on good terms. Oh, okay. So they, all right. They just, the ex-husbands were never a suspect.
Wow.
So Jeanette which was a friend of Sherrill's, believes that whoever was responsible for this disappearance was not familiar with Sherrill, insisting that she wouldn't have been the primary target anyway. And she told the newspaper that about Sherrill, she was about as close to Mother Teresa as you could get. Whoever did this had to be someone who did not know her. No one had any kind of vendetta against her. The dog was still there. All of their stuff was there. It just didn't make any kind of sense. So by June 9th, 2 days after they, after the women known as the Springfield Three had disappeared, the FBI was brought in. There were a lot of out-of-state leads, and there was, you gotta think, 3 different women go missing in this really strange case. So this police department was overwhelmed. They had so much to go through. They were allocating almost all of their investigative resources on this one case. They were struggling to go through the massive amount of information at their fingertips. And so the captain at the time, his name was Tony Glenn, stated, "I still wouldn't label it an abduction, but there's a strong indication a crime was committed. At this time, we just don't know what it is." The girls were popular, pretty, social girls at a big high school. They had a lot of friends. There were at least 100 people at each of these parties that the girls went to at graduation night. Sherrill had over 250 clients. So we're trying to interview every single one of all of these people, plus anyone else who knows anything. That's a big job. And as this case began approaching the middle of the following week, investigators confirmed that they were in touch with at least 3 suspects who were in the process of either being questioned or re-questioned. This included Susie's brother and Sherrill's son, Bart Streeter, as well as 2 of Susie's ex-boyfriends. But more, we'll talk more about the ex-boyfriends in a little bit. Police had gone through a long list of clients from Sherrill's hair salon, as well as a guest list of the parties Susie and Stacy had gone to hours before. They'd even questioned a young man who lived across the street from Sherrill and Susie, whose 1991 red Chevy Cavalier had been stolen Monday evening, but they determined that it was just a strange coincidence and had nothing to do with the crime. Meanwhile, federal investigators were helping police expand the case outside of the immediate area, trying to locate out-of-state family members and friends and questions. The FBI's involvement also allowed investigators access to tools like psychological profiling, which they hoped would narrow down the potential suspect pool. The Springfield police would even begin corresponding with psychics, although, as noted by the lead investigator, David Asher, they've never helped solve a case before, but in his words, "I keep hoping for a first time." Which, I mean, you gotta keep hope up, right? Police received hundreds of tips about this case all over the country, pointing investigators towards so many different persons of interest, potential sightings. They were working 12-hour shifts for weeks. Investigators would spend they looked into every tip they got. And so one of the tips included a claim that the bodies could be found in a nearby Pearson Creek. There were none. Another caller from New Jersey claimed evidence that she'd seen Sherrill boarding an airplane. A pair of white shoes found abandoned on Missouri 14 south of Nixa gave investigators hope that the women might have been there at some point, but that was never proven. Then there was a sealed map placed anonymously in Springfield News Leader paper rack that led investigators to a Northwest Springfield apartment complex. One of dozens they'd search along the Bolivar Road to no avail. Police would search through most nearby bodies of waters for a sign of the women, including Lake Springfield and long stretches of the nearby James River, as well as every other small lake. Wow. No trace of them had been found.
Wow.
Early on, authorities would seek information about a vehicle seen early on Sunday morning, June 7th, but wouldn't publicize what type of vehicle it was. Instead, they chose to withhold that information, believing it might be pertinent to their investigation and help exclude possible witness sightings. So they didn't want people to call and say, "Oh yeah, I saw that green van," or whatever.
Oh yeah.
So the lead investigator, David, had told that someone saw a car in that neighborhood. You just don't drive through a neighborhood and not be seen. Authorities would also seek information about a potential prowler in the neighborhood based on reports that prior tenant of that home that Sherrill and Susie lived in. The tenant claimed to have seen transients and parking lot partiers quite frequently while living there, and even reported strangers walking up to and looking into her home when she lived there. And this included an incident where she claimed a dirty-looking old guy broke into her home, likely under the influence of drugs. So while the last incident wasn't reported to police, some of these other claims were confirmed by other residents of the neighborhood, including a former police officer and assistant city manager for Springfield named Kurt, who lived on that street just a few houses down. He had trouble believing, however, that any of these transient individuals seen around there had carried out the abduction. He did confirm that the area seemed to attract quite a bit, but he said, they were transients. They're not the type of people who are capable of abducting 3 people at once, not even 1, much less 3. If you think about it, it takes some doing to get 3 people out of a house. So sadly, Sherrill and Susie had both been each other's biggest advocate, so them disappearing at the same time made it very hard for anyone in the region to speak on their behalf. However, they did have family that would speak to the press on occasion, including Sherrill's uncle Cliff Williams, who lived nearby in Webster County, as well as her son Brett Streeter. It was reported that a gas station employee may have seen Sherrill Levitt at around 2:15 a.m. on June 7th, at around the same time that Stacy and Susie were leaving Janelle's home. Now, Steve Thompson was a 24-year-old employee at the gas station about 4.5 miles south of Sherrill's home along East Delmer Street, claims that he saw a woman that looked incredibly similar to Sherrill right after 2 a.m. that morning. This was in an area where Sherrill and Susie had lived just months beforehand before relocating to their home on East Delmer Street, and where they still spent a lot of time in, so they were kind of regulars in that neighborhood. While it was hard for police to make heads or tails of this witness report, it would open up the possibility that Sherrill may have left her home early on that morning to look for Susie at around the same time that Susie and Stacy had been driving home from Janelle's home. It would also indicate that Susie and Stacy may have been at the gas station earlier that evening at around the same time they were headed to the party in Springfield. That party is the one that took place at Michelle's. That's the one that got broken up by the police. It was roughly 1 mile away from this gas station. And so all of this information had been given to the police, and the police believed that the witness sighting was credible. But
there were no videos at this point.
Yeah.
Right? There's no convenience store videos or anything.
Yeah. So
that's a question.
Yeah, no. I'm sorry. No. So the main component of Steve Thomas's witness report that police would struggle to verify was the belief that Sherrill had been out looking for Susie late that evening. As far as they gathered, this was the only single report that had been attempting to locate, basically everyone else was like, she wasn't looking for Susie. She knew where Susie was. She believed that Susie was staying with her friends at this hotel in Branson as they had planned, but none of Susie's friends or other family members ever got a phone call from Sherrill that night looking for Susie. Kathy, which was Janelle's mother, would tell the newspaper if she wanted to get a hold of her daughter, she knew where to call. Our phone did not ring a single time. I don't want to call anybody a liar, but to me, it's just very strange that she did not call us when we had told her to call us if she needed to get a hold of Susie. Mary Keller, another friend of Sherrill's, would also express doubt about this alleged sighting, saying for her to be out at 2 a.m. just whistling in the wind or whatever, that's just nuts. The only way she would go out like that is if someone called her and said Susie needed her. Yet, despite this, authorities would state that Steve Thompson's information had some, truth to it, and would tell reporters everything he told us that can be verified has been verified.
Wow.
Now, Thompson's account would undoubtedly shake up that potential timeline of events because, they had originally thought that Sherrill was at home. So this put into question what may have happened inside or outside of the home that early morning hours of June 7th. However, weeks later, police seemed to have kind of moved on past this testimony, believing that it may have just been a case of mistaken identity after all, that they never really touched upon what led them to that sudden change in belief. just that they no longer believed that this verified supposed information was verified and it was just the wrong person.
Wow.
So later that month, another potential witness would come forward. Y'all, when I say there were so many reports and tips, I mean, I think it was like over 5,000. Yeah, I talk about it later. I just don't remember the name.
But imagine having to follow up on all
That's what
of
I'm
those.
saying.
That's
So
crazy.
I know I'm kind of going fast and I'm talking about a lot of these, but I do link to every single article and there's a really good podcast that I'll talk about and a really good article that lists every suspect, almost all of the tips,
Wow.
all of that kind of stuff. So later that month, another potential witness came forward. A waitress at Georgia's Steakhouse, a 24/7 diner located along South Glenstone Avenue, claimed that she saw the 3 women there that morning of June 7th at some point between 1 and 3 a.m. It was believed that there was a mother and a daughter identical in appearance to Sherrill and Susie, and that they were there with a younger brunette woman, possibly Stacy. The waitress claims that the younger blonde woman, supposedly Susie, was visibly intoxicated and was acting giddy, and that the older woman, presumably Sherrill, was trying to calm her down. The third woman, possibly Stacy, remained quiet during their entire time there. Now, this would push back that known timeline a bit longer and would indicate that someone may have followed the 3 women home from the diner.
Sounds like it.
But as was the case with the potential gas station sighting, it was impossible to determine whether this was a true accounting of the women or if it was just women that looked like them or just someone trying to be part of the story.
yeah.
If this was just a memory of someone recounting events before, because no one else claimed these women were drunk. Like, they hadn't really been drinking at these parties. And, Janelle's mother physically saw Stacy and Susie get in their car at 2:15. So for them to get home and get to this diner and eat, it would have just really been a weird timeline.
And when she saw them, they were
in separate cars.
not drunk.
Okay, so these are just a few of the suspects because, again, there were so many serial killers that took, like, prisoners, serial killers. All of these people were taking credit for this, and some of them, they just happened to have cases that were similar. There was a lot of killing going on at this time, okay? So Bart, he was 27 at the time. It came out that he hadn't actually spoken to his mother or sister in a few months. And he would soon find himself in the middle of this story because police set to uncover what that relationship was with them. So as the closest family connection either of them had in the Springfield area, he found himself very high up on the suspect list, especially once the police learned that he had grown estranged from them months beforehand. So Bart was interviewed by investigators multiple times, and like many of the other suspects, he took polygraph tests. However, police officials refrained from calling him a suspect, describing him as, answering their questions, whatever. Bart himself would state that he had nothing to hide and reportedly sat with police through multiple interviews and even voluntarily dropped by police headquarters to chat with investigators about the current status. Months later, though, the pressure of the high-profile investigation seems to have gotten to Bart, and he quit his job and he left town. Now, they dug into the backstory of why they had stopped speaking, and they learned that one of Susie's boyfriends, who had also become a suspect, Susie's relationship with this young man had led Bart to voicing his disapproval, which led him to have multiple arguments with his mother and sister, ultimately losing touch with them for months before they disappeared. So basically he was, I don't like your boyfriend. Yeah. And Susie was like, I don't care. And I will say later on in life, Bart did have some criminal problems, but nothing that would indicate like necessarily that he did it. So the other suspect was Mike Kovacs. He was a young man that had dated Susie for a couple of years up until September of the year prior, 1991. So during this relationship, both Mike and Susie were reportedly very abusive with one another, with Kovacs admitting that he and Susie would both hit each other quite a bit, citing their immaturity as a rationale. Despite that, though, the two had dated for 2 years and actually lived together for a brief period of time the summer before Susie's disappearance, but that their relationship had ended rather explosively later that fall in September of 1991. As it turned out, Susie had sought a restraining order against Mike roughly 7 months prior before her disappearance. She had filed for that on October 23rd, 1991. In a sworn statement, Susie claimed that Kovacs was abusive towards her and had expressed multiple signs of troubling behavior, such as slashing her tires, threatening her via telephone, and harassing her at school, work, and home. For that reason, a 10-day restraining order was granted on October 23rd, but at a hearing, it was extended to beyond November 5th. Susie was a no-show, so the protection order expired. When asked by reporters about Mike being a suspect, police told the newspaper, "Now you know why he was one of the first people we interviewed and began doing background checks on. We do have 4 or 5 people we are looking at very closely. These are people who have non-substantial alibis for break-ins, for breaks in time during the time we believe the women disappeared. Mr. Kovacs is one of those individuals." While Mike Kovac was suspected of potential involvement early on, it is believed that the investigation quickly ruled him out as a suspect due to his relationship with Susie seeming to have been a thing of the past and their explosive breakup happening nearly a year beforehand. They doubted he would have sought revenge at all, especially at that time. Stating that it would have been closer to when they actually broke up. Yet that didn't stop them from looking into him. So he was technically a suspect, but they didn't really think he had current motive to do it.
What do you think?
I don't think it was him. I think it was the son, personally. Or actually, I think it's the one I'm about to talk about. So there were a few other suspects in the case. Well, I don't know. I'm about to say, but I don't know. I really don't know. Yeah. So there were a few other suspects. So this other one was another ex-boyfriend of Suzanne's named Dustin Rekla, and he had broken into a Springfield mausoleum, and a few months before the women vanished and stole $30 worth of gold fillings from a skull. Now, police looked at him because Suzanne had given investigators a statement about the break-in and was rumored to be a probable witness against Dustin in court. Dustin and his 2 friends that helped him in the robbery were known to be together and in that area the night the women went missing. But to me, this seems so extreme to kidnap and murder 3 women over what I would assume would be like 3 days in jail because all they did was steal $30. You know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't like they robbed all the graves. They weren't going to go to prison. They hadn't murdered anybody. Like, it seems... And even the police kind of felt like, well, that's really extreme behavior to kidnap and murder these 3 women.
It is.
So they kind of ruled them out. In 1993, a prisoner led investigators to a farm in western Webster County where he claimed the bodies of Sherrill, Susie, and Stacy would be found. However, an extensive search of the region turned up nothing new. Like all of the other tips, this had been a dead end, but the prisoner that led police to this farm would remain in their crosshairs for a while longer due to his forced involvement in the story. So the prisoner was awaiting sentencing for an unrelated weapons violation in another county at the time and told police that a friend had confessed to killing the 3 missing women while drinking. The prisoner then gave police the reported location where they found the women's where they could find the women's bodies, as well as a gray-green van used to transport their bodies, leading to the search in 1993. Now, the reason the gray-green van is important is because that was the color of the car that the police had not released to the public. So, surprisingly, that location did have a tie to a separate crime from 1989. In that instance, 3 Springfield residents had also disappeared at the same time. 35-year-old Mary, 34-year-old John, and 40-year-old Daniel. The victims were believed to have been killed in a drug deal gone wrong, and information had led police to that same stretch of land in 1990, just 3 years earlier, where they heard that 2 out of 3 bodies had been disposed of. So the property owner, Francis Robb Sr., later pleaded guilty, though, of 2 counts. So for that case, it ended up actually being the property owner, but they did not find any remains when they went back and searched for the Springfield Three. Barred by a partial gag order from revealing anything found during the search, police would reveal that this was just the second of 3 searches they conducted in the area during this time, all of which pertain to the Springfield Three. Despite the search warrants being sealed by Webster County, the Springfield Police Captain Todd Whitson would reveal it was not just routine. We have a substantial interest in this. The inmate that led police to this location later pleaded guilty to counts of unlawful possession of a concealed weapon and was sentenced in November of 1993 to 2 years in prison. Despite it being reported that police had found nothing substantial during these searches, investigators speculated that this inmate did actually know more than about the case than he let on, just because he had provided information that was not known to the public, like the color of the car. Anyways, nothing ever came of that. He got convicted of another crime.
Wow.
They didn't find any bodies. So in 1998, Robert Craig Cox was imprisoned in Texas as a convicted kidnapper and robber, and was a suspect in a Florida murder. He told journalists that he knew the 3 women had been murdered and buried and claimed their bodies would never be recovered. In 1992, he had been living in Springfield, and when interviewed then, he had told investigators that he was with his girlfriend at church the morning after the women disappeared, which at the time, she backed him up. However, she later recanted her statement, and she said that night that the women disappeared, she had lied for him, that he had asked her to lie. So then he stated that he was actually at the home of his parents the night the disappearance happened, and they confirmed his alibi. Authorities were uncertain if Cox was involved in this case or if he was seeking recognition for the alleged murders by issuing false statements. He stated to the authorities and journalists, "Well, fine, I'll disclose what happened to these 3 women after my mother dies." And then nothing else ever came of that. So
I'm assuming his mother has come and gone.
Yeah. There were so many leads the investigators had to follow up through the years. Other prisoners, other grave sites.
You said a 5,000.
Calls from the public. Like I said, it could be days and days. There's a podcast in the notes called I'll talk about what it's called in a minute, but there was an article called Unresolved. It's called Unresolved, and I'll also link that down. And it's got a ton of different parts. It covers everything in such a very detailed. There's like 25 pages of information. The reason I'm going to talk about the podcast later is because I give the name and what it's all about. So on December 31st, 1992, a man called America's Most Wanted hotline with info about the disappearance, but the call was disconnected when the switchboard operator attempted to link up with the Springfield investigators. Police said the caller had prime knowledge of the abductions, and they publicly appealed for the man to contact them again, but he never did. Both Suzanne and Stacy were declared legally dead in 1997. I didn't see anything about Sherrill being declared dead, but I would assume they would just declare them all dead at the same time. Technically, they were declared dead, but the case still is labeled as missing persons. Investigators would receive another tip. This tip said the women's bodies were buried in the foundations of the south parking garage at Cox Hospital in 2007.
Oh my gosh. They're not going to dig anything up.
In 2007, crime reporter Kathy Beard invited Rick Norland, a mechanical engineer, to scan a corner of the parking garage with ground-penetrating radar. Norland found 3 areas roughly the same size that he said were consistent with a gravesite location. 2 of these were parallel, and 1 of them was perpendicular. The Springfield Police Department spokesperson, Lisa Cox, said that the person who reported the tip provided no evidence or logical reasoning behind this theory at the time or since then. She also said that the parking garage began construction in September 1993, over a year after the disappearances. Digging up that area and subsequently reconstructing the structure would be extremely costly, and without any reasonable belief that the bodies could be located there, it's illogical to do so. And for those reasons, we do not intend to do this. Investigators have determined this lead to not be credible. But what were those three
things?
Things that looked like grave sites? The three? Are you kidding me? The parking lot can be reconstructed. They never tore it up. So the three body images that showed up on this radar, they never know what they are. So Daryl Moore, a former...
Why can't like a millionaire pay for that and pay for the garage to be rebuilt? Damn.
Daryl Moore, a former assistant at the Greene County prosecutor's office, said the tip came from someone who either claimed to be a psychic or claimed to have a dream or vision about the case. Okay,
But
well,
they
the
also
bodies
scanned
were
it.
still there.
They scanned it. It was there. Okay, whatever. All right.
Anyways, so a little bit of positivity, I guess, if you will. In the wake of Stacy's disappearance, her parents have struggled as they try to navigate this uncertainty, like this new world that awaits loved ones of missing people. They learned firsthand how many family members of crime victims often do not know what to do, or in many cases, who to even turn to for help. So in 1994, Stuart and Janice established the One Missing Link organization, which aimed to connect grieving families with that very thing, the missing link that families could turn to when looking for their missing loved ones, regardless of age or jurisdiction.
Wow.
So Stuart told the Greene County police officials at the time, the one thing we found is that missing persons cases are not at the top of the list for law enforcement until 24 or 36 hours later, when you find you have a felony. By then, your evidence is gone and your suspects are gone. So while this is common sense for many of us that are fully immersed in the world of true crime, they don't really start searching. Now, sometimes they will, and some laws have changed, but still, for the most part, especially adults, they say adults can go missing anytime they want. So the organization did work to change the age limits of missing persons. So their daughter, Stacy, had just turned 18 years old at the time of her disappearance. At the age of her disappearance, aging her out of a lot of those programs that focus on searching for children. So because she was an adult, a lot of these separate organizations that would help missing people were only focused on actual children, which to me, that's still a child. That is still someone's child. So over time, Janice and Stuart would continue advocating for multiple causes in the area, not just their own daughter's disappearance. They focused primarily on cases, they focused primarily on cases involving young women, particularly those in the same demographic as Stacy, who had gone missing, but campaigned against domestic violence, things of that nature, in the hopes of preventing others from becoming victims. Janice has served 2 terms on the board of directors for the Association of Missing and Exploited Children's Organization, and served as the co-chairperson for the Southwest Missouri Missing Persons Task Force. So they were very involved in trying to help other families not go through what they did. So the case of the Springfield Three remains unsolved, even though there have been over 5,000 tips from the public, and there have been a ton of shows, a ton of podcasts. There were billboards, there were searches. I mean, everybody was looking for these women. So the podcast I mentioned earlier that I said was very, very, very in depth is by a journalist called Ann Rodriguez Jones, it was originally titled The Springfield Three, A Small Town Disappearance, and it was started in 2021. She now calls her podcast The Ozarks True Crime. But I highly, highly recommend this podcast because each season she does a deep dive into a case. Mm-hmm. So she has one whole season dedicated to the Springfield Three that talks about the theories, the missing women, the suspects, all of the things that went wrong in the investigation, because if I talked about all of the things that went wrong, again, it would be like a 5-parter. And then she does a lot of interviews. She interviews the family members. She does a really, really good job. So just by chance, if you see these women, if they're still alive, Sherrill was exactly 5 foot tall, 110 pounds, brown eyes, short bleached blonde hair, naturally curly. And she was just a thin build. She had freckles. Stacy was white. She was 5'3", blue eyes, dark blonde hair. She also had freckles. And then Suzanne was white, 102 pounds, brown eyes, straight bleached blonde hair. She had a scar on her right arm and a small tumor in the left corner of her mouth. And, you know, they are technically legally dead, but it's still a missing persons case. So there is a reward fund of $43,000 that has been established for the location and prosecution of the persons responsible for the abduction of these 3 women. So anyone with information about the disappearance of any of these women is requested to contact the Springfield Police Department or Crime Stoppers, or you can contact the FBI because the case is technically still unsolved.
Even though they're considered, and I don't know if you know this answer, even though they're considered, technically they're now considered deceased. Mm-hmm. If there's no body, if there's somebody that they find that is responsible for their abduction, do they get charged for murder?
I don't know. That's a good question.
You know, like
they would definitely be charged for the abduction and kidnapping.
Yeah,
I would assume since they've been cleared, I would guess since they've been cleared legally dead, they would, but I don't know. Right. We have done stories where people
could walk in the door now, and all of a sudden,
well, because we did that one story of the husband that was charged for murdering his wife, even though they never found her body. It's just the amount of evidence. So I think it would depend on that. I think it's insane that these 3 women.
There's no evidence. Yeah,
it had to have been more than one person, because how can one person go into this home and abduct 3 women and they just totally disappear? No trace, no evidence. Don't steal anything from the house. Like, it's so weird they didn't take anything.
You think it's the son? Because there's no break-in.
Yeah, there's no break-in.
They went willingly.
Like I said, later in life, he had a lot of criminal
Is he still
activity.
alive?
Yes. The ex-boyfriends are still alive. But again, it seems extreme that one would try to do retaliation a year later when there hadn't been anything between them, and the other one was going to only get in trouble for like $30. So the ex-husbands were completely out of the picture. Like I said, there were so many serial killers in the area, just in the country in general. There were other crimes in the area that were kind of linked. So many people try to take credit for it because they wanted the recognition. They even looked at motorcycle clubs in the area, like the transients that were in the, they looked at all kinds of people, and just nothing could point to why someone would do this. Why did they just take the 3 women, and where did they go with them? Because there's no evidence, no witnesses, no struggles. Nobody heard anything. The girls were already home. They weren't even supposed to be there. Like, how did they get into the home without a break-in, unless the girls came home and forgot to lock the door? But that's still very strange that there was no sign of a struggle unless it was somebody they knew.
God, if we had cell phones or video cameras in that time, this would have been solved, because
it probably would have still been just so grainy.
Well, yes, but we would have been able to see that they drove up to that convenience store, or to see whether or not they were at that diner. Cell phones would have pinged. There would have been, like, when was the last time they called somebody? When was the last time they, used their phone? Where were they when they used that phone? Phone? And so I feel like there's none of that. There's none of that. There's none of these things that, like, oh, well, I saw them at the diner, but there's no. She might have been wrong about the time.
Yeah,
she could have been like, okay, it was really 3 a.m. and they had been drinking, and the mom was like, ugh, come on, let's go get some food and to wake you up or to sober you up, or like. Not to say that they were doing that, but like, maybe she was right. Maybe they were there, but she just got the time wrong.
Yeah.
It of course that changes everything, and that would mean somebody followed them home from the diner. And then, like, if it was the son, you'd be able to check his call records. You'd be able to see, you gotta. Well, it all depends on what that investigator believes or doesn't believe.
Yeah.
I think he's telling the truth.
Yeah.
I'm just like, ugh.
Yeah, so who knows? Crazy, yes. But yeah, it's
Crazy.
Unsolved. If you have a question, you can get, if you have a lead, you can get $43,000. That was up to $100,000 at one point, but now it's gone down to $43,000. So, I don't know.
Wow. They have to spend that money.
Family and friends never stop looking. So anyways,
No.
that's
Yeah.
story.
All right. Well, when you hear this, we're going to take a week off because we have, Ashley's out of town, and it's just not. I don't think you get back in time. But anyway, we might miss a week, is what I'm telling you. So hang tight, people. We will be back. And I'll have a great story for you then. But have a great trip.
Thank you.
And I guess that's it.
Okay. See something, say something.
See something, say something. Love you. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.